Welcome to Business Talk here on businesstech.co.za. We're turning the spotlight now onto one of the most significant challenges facing South African businesses, the growing cost of carbon. Joining me is Nepgen, who's head of Discovery Green, very forward-thinking division inside Discovery that's driving sustainability initiatives and helping businesses transition to greener operations. Andre and his team, in collaboration with EY Africa, recently conducted research that delivers quite a stark warning. In just a decade, South African businesses could be paying up to 60% of their electricity generation costs just in additional carbon taxes. Well, what does that mean for the future of business in South Africa, and how can companies prepare themselves for the inevitable transition to a low-carbon economy? Let's find out. Andre, welcome to the show. We know that Treasury's recent paper on phase 2 of our carbon tax has stirred some controversy, but it looks like Treasury is going to press ahead regardless. So maybe you could briefly unpack how you arrived at this number, that in 10 years, some South African businesses could be paying almost a full 2/3 of their electricity generation in additional carbon tax.
Sure, Michael. Yes, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. So it's actually, I agree with you, it's quite a terrifying number to come to think of it. And, currently, carbon taxes, specifically around electricity, has been covered in what is called a carbon tax levy, being levied off the electricity price. And we've almost always ignored that portion because it was so small. But with this new carbon tax laws that are currently being proposed, and when they do come into effect, we'll basically see either it'll be on the generator side, which might be in this case Eskom or whoever else generates energy, but start to pay carbon taxes on their emissions. It's a scary number basically for two primary reasons, and it's important to understand that it's the carbon taxes in South Africa have almost snuck in over the last few years. If you look at it, it's been for most CFOs in business have been a bit of a rounding error than a real substantial element. And what has changed is that we see two factors driving that increase. And what you're going to see is what is becoming a rounding error is quickly going to double, then triple, and increase even more. And the reason for that is quite simple. We currently enjoy a very low price of carbon. So the carbon tax price is actually quite low compared to international standards. Compared to, say, Europe, our current rate is about 17 times less per ton of carbon than the rest. And you know, we need to take that into account. So there's a legislated increase in the price of carbon. That is almost that is a 0.1, and we need to take that into account. So that outstrips out inflation. The other factor, which is very important, is that we've all, as businesses, been enjoying what is called an allowance. Now, the way allowance work is basically says that of your emissions, you can exclude 60, 70, 80% of it in the carbon tax calculation. And that has been a primary factor. And the reason that is in place is because you cannot just introduce carbon taxes in its full form, because businesses would be hit with massive, massive tax bills. So the idea is to gradually let it in. Now, if you take the allowances and how they're going to fade away, say, over the next decade, and take into account, say, the taxes that many of our South African businesses who operate internationally, who export goods, who sell overseas, have to take into account, they're either going to be taxed here in South Africa or taxed when their product reaches the other side of the country. And based on our quality, our dirtiness of our electricity, I must note here that unfortunately, and this is just a history of South Africa, we have the dirtiest electricity of any major economy in the world. And as a result, it never used to matter, it now matters. So what you're going to see is if you take those two factors, allowances, very dirty electricity, as well as the increase in the carbon tax price, and of course taxes on the way out, you are going to see a substantial increase, both locally in the market, but more importantly, you're going to get to that 60% if you export your goods internationally.
Wow. And I mean, it's a triple whammy almost. If you look at it, carbon taxes going up, the phasing out of the tax allowance, and then you've got CBAM, carbon border adjustment mechanism at the European gate. If you don't do something about this, how do you think this is going to impact local businesses and their competitiveness? If you look at those South African businesses that still use very carbon intensive methods like coal power, which most of them in industrial terms still probably do.
Yeah, it's quite scary. So we got to look at it almost at two lenses. You get those businesses who operate in South Africa and South Africa alone, and the increase of that, and those carbon taxes. If you only operate in that space, the impact is going to be less, but still quite substantial. We're still talking, potentially half that impact, around about 30%. Of the cost of electricity increasing. So we already have big increases coming through in the cost of electricity, which I think businesses will have to absorb or find a way to manage, and there are ways around that. But then you have that additional layer of the carbon tax being added onto it, which I think will put a lot of businesses, specifically those who are the high intensive energy users of South Africa, that subsegment where out of the total expense bill, electricity makes up a big portion of that. Then it becomes quite critical. We've done analysis of various industries. If you look at the steel industry, the aluminium industry, the fertilizer industry, the cement industry, the local taxes will be a painful element of it. We saw that some of the analysis we did for some of the industries, some of the companies, based on their current profit figures, would actually turn into a loss, which is quite terrifying. And then, more importantly, the high intensive end users, we're talking about the smelters, where the majority of the products, say aluminium, is being exported internationally. If that is being exported to Europe, we could see the electricity cost being so enormous that it seems unreasonable, or seems unlikely that these businesses would just be okay absorbing that. I just don't see how you could compete internationally with that cost.
Yeah. That's why I heard stories of South 32, which owns Hillside and Bayside, those aluminium smelters, trying to negotiate with Eskom to see if it can get direct power from things like Coburg, or something that doesn't have that carbon intensity. So maybe you could just help us understand from that export perspective the complexities around CBAM and their implications.
Of course. So CBAM is a mechanism, just for those people who don't understand. The mechanism is to ensure that companies exporting to Europe are held under the same rules and regulations when it comes to emissions when they bring their product in, to create a fair environment. Because in Europe, there's a tax allowance and companies get taxed on it, and it is quite high. And understandably, they want to protect their industry there to ensure that cheap, dirty products aren't being brought in at cheaper prices because they don't have that same rules. So the way CBAM works is it's a mechanism to ensure that the businesses who export their products are subject to the same carbon taxes if they do emit, and they pay the same price for their products on the way in. So currently CBAM, when it comes to electricity and the various ones around that, it's currently just a few industries that will be impacted: steel, aluminium, fertilizer, cement, to name a few. But the intention is to start there and then roll it out to most industries, or most products that we do export overseas. Now, the way it works on that side is you also have allowances. So there's also allowances. These start higher, but fade away very, very quickly. So in 2026 it'll still be okay. But then get hurt very, very, very quickly. But I think the scary part is in Europe, the carbon tax price is 17 times higher than our current one, which is terrifying. I mean, that is closer to the $90 mark per ton of carbon, which is very, very high. And I think if you look at I think South Africa government recently did an analysis of how much of the exports would be at risk. We're talking 53 billion rand worth of exports at risk from the CBAM element. It's coming. I don't think there's much we can do to change our trajectory around that. We just have to accelerate looking at solutions.
Well, but that's the bottom line, isn't it? And I think for a long time, maybe we've been a little bit flat-footed and slow to adapt, because I think many thought that it wouldn't happen. And yet it is happening, and it's happening whether we like it or not. There may be people who point fingers about this being a new form of green protectionism. That doesn't change the fact that it's a reality. It's here. One wonders whether government intervention could at least help mitigate the impending crisis. What role should the South African government play in trying to help businesses navigate this transition? Do you think it's currently doing enough?
I think it is. It's not. I don't think it's getting the sufficient attention. I think the options available are quite limited in that regard. I don't think it's a single, a policy initiative or anything like that could prevent this, because the same rules are applied to all countries exporting to Europe. So preferential treatment for a specific country is going to be very, very difficult to do. I think the antidote really available to it is to look at ways in which to accelerate solutions for these specific industries that allow them to still compete in this space. And to me, that really is not policy necessarily. It's not government intervention on this, because that'll just run into roadblocks and more headaches, but more a way of saying, how can we, for these industries that will be impacted first, prioritize their transition to greener energy, greener products, greenifying their operations. That should be the focus on the sport. And how do you support those businesses to get there? I think that is really the way.
It's a big challenge, because many of these industries, you talk cement, you talk steel, they're called hard to abate industries because they are so highly energy intensive that even, rolling to renewable, it isn't just a question of sticking a few solar panels on the roof. You've got to commission very large IPPs and then wheel those to your site. What steps do you see as critical to making this transition?
Now, your observation is absolutely right in that, these are large energy users. Often, we see in the news, and more recently we saw quite a few coming out around new plants and generation facilities being constructed. If you look at the size of those that are being done, either as part of the Eskom procurement or the government procurement program, or through private elements of it, the sizes of those is not sufficient to take any of these industries to a large level of renewable energy. I mean, the energy that they need is just absolutely enormous. The good thing, I think, the positive thing is that South Africa's got some of the best natural resources you can imagine from a renewable energy point of view. From a solar radiation point of view, we are quite far ahead in terms of Europe. So our ability to get really cost-effective renewable energy from solar is very positive. We have good wind resources if grid access is available to those. So there are opportunities to do it. I think we as an industry have been unfortunately focused, businesses have been focused on the last few years around how do you protect your business sustainability against load shedding. Now that has been successfully changed, or at least narrative around that has been changed, which is very, very positive. Now businesses are starting to look, but I think we've almost lost a few years in that planning process of how do we move to a greater amount of renewable energy while focusing on availability, if that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. And now we are finally, we hope, touch wood, touch everything you can, out of the load shedding woods. I think transitioning to renewable alternatives like solar, it must be front and center. You've got the increased kind of incentive, I guess, of these carbon taxes. Do you believe that is enough to make these technologies a more attractive financial option for businesses when the CFO starts calculating what the increased carbon tax is going to be versus the investment into cleaner, renewable sources of power? Or do we need to see additional incentives put in place?
The financial incentive, just in the pure construct of the actual solution, is, I think, already there. I think if you take into account carbon taxes, if you take into account the price of renewables today, I think the financial, the business case is there. I don't think there's anything impeding it. I think critical consideration is if you look at businesses, especially you spoke about these large industries, they can't always build on site. We at Discovery, we have a building that we put a few solar panels on. We're out of space. Unfortunately, we managed to reduce our consumption by 3%. It just speaks to, the solution is not putting up solar panels on your rooftop or putting up next to your space. The solution, in our view, really is large-scale renewable energy plants. Similar to how you built coal plants in the past, you build that same scale renewable energy plants and you connect them to the grid. We call it wheeling. And that is really I think, the most cost-effective method. And if you look at the economies of scale for that, if you look at the mechanisms that are currently in play for that, the case is is probably stronger for the CFO than the head of ESG in the conversation. I think the CFO would see real value in this. Of course, there's a lot of things to take into account. There's a lot of risk around renewable energy. I'm going to say something extremely obvious, but we all know this: solar panels only work when the sun shines. So you still need a solution for your nighttime, and that's where wind comes in and battery storage come in. And you need to take into account these other alternative technologies as well. And these you can't always do. I mean, you can't put a wind turbine in Sandton, for example.
No, absolutely. And it also, when you then start talking about battery energy storage systems, BESS, as it's called, it maybe starts raising the costs a little bit. But overall, I mean, it's a complex environment. And this is really where Discovery Green has seen an opportunity to help companies make this transition and make an informed transition. So maybe you could just elaborate on how you at Discovery Green are helping businesses to do this. What tools or support do you provide to ease the shift and to make the transition?
Thank you. So Michael, Discovery Green is Discovery's renewable energy platform for business. So basically, what we do is we are procuring large scale renewable energy plants, the plants that I spoke about earlier, really, really large scales ones, connecting them to the national grid and wheeling it to companies. But what we do is a little bit different, because often people, I think with all of us, we put up solar panels probably on our rooftops, as most consumers or most people in South Africa, and we've come to learn how solar energy works. And one thing that is clear is that it's always been a model of you pay for what is generated, you don't pay for what is consumed. That is renewable energy. So the wind doesn't care, or the wind doesn't care if you're using the energy or not. You will pay for it if the wind blows and the sun shines. And that is a complexity that often comes alongside renewable energy. It is not always certain. It's intermittent. It's volatile. And for that reason, you'll see the majority of businesses in South Africa starting to look at renewable energy as a way to supplement or do a little slice of their consumption. We're talking 20 to 30 to 40% of their energy consumption. The problem with 20 to 30 or 40% is that it leaves still 60% dirty and 60% that you rely on that you're going to pay carbon taxes on. Our view and our real play in this is to say, could we not use some of the skills that we have as Discovery, our ability to try and solve this problem in the middle, aggregation, bringing together various amounts of industry, applying a bit of mathematical magic in the middle, and find a way which you cannot take businesses just at the 30 or 40% level, but finding a way in which we can get them to the 90% level. And that is really our proposition and our product. We're going around and telling businesses that, renewable energy is not just a slice. There are ways out there that you can come and say 9/10 of the electricity I consume is renewable. It's clean. It doesn't attract carbon taxes. It increases at inflation only, and it comes at a cheaper price of what I'm currently paying. So that is really our play. We're using Discovery, its expertise, its capabilities, and rolling it out to businesses across South Africa.
What do you think has been the key to enable that? Is it the legislation around wheeling, the ability? I know a lot was made ever since government did away with the 100 megawatt cap. We've seen how much has been registered at NERSA, now the equivalent of Medupi and Kusile in the space of a couple of years. What has been the biggest key to unlock and enable this change?
So the ERA amendment bill, which has been approved by Parliament but not yet promulgated, is a critical piece of legislation that allows South Africa to move to a competitive market for electricity. So currently we're all used to a single provider. This allows you to there to be competition in the market and sort of bid or drive down prices to find the most efficient price. That has been absolutely critical. And what you've seen is that there's suddenly been an absolute explosion in the interest in this industry. We've got a unique setup in South Africa with available land, great natural resources, and entrepreneurial people. So there's been a massive explosion in that space. The tricky part, though, is getting these things done is harder than I think people think. I think rooftop solar is quite an easy thing to do, but in order to build these large-scale renewable energy plants, and we're talking about investment coming into South Africa either through banks or through external equity investors to try and build these plants, are absolutely enormous. We're talking tens of billions of rands flowing into South Africa, creating jobs, facilitating new generation projects. It's all a very, very good story. But in order to do that, you need a lot of surety. You need a lot of comfort that for the next 10 to 20 years, you're going to be able to sell that energy. And I think that's where, there's been a lot of excitement, but the ability to turn that into actual projects that are generating is a lot harder. And that to me is the hurdles to that really has been has been a transition in the market reform. So, we're all used to a single buyer of electricity or single generator of electricity. In order to introduce new players, there's going to be some time for that to take effect, and we keep working at that. And the other one is you have to get the market comfortable, consumers, investors, banks, funders comfortable with operating in South Africa in this new market. And these all take time. I think we're doing the groundwork now to get in place a private market for electricity, and hopefully, we'll see a rapid transition in South Africa.
It was one of the things that struck me when I was in New Zealand in 2011 for the World Cup over there. The fact that you had options, you had choice. There wasn't just a single provider. And I mean, yes, there are streets ahead of us in terms of their liberalization, and they've also got geothermal and all of that. But it was amazing. You could have a look at who's providing the best quality of service, the lowest cost, whatever it is. It's true competition, and that will take time. But it's a very exciting time in South Africa in the energy space. Just lastly, Andre, with the carbon tax landscape evolving and this global push towards net zero intensifying, as we saw at COP29 recently, what advice would you give to South African business leaders who are now just beginning their sustainability journeys and waking up a little bit late, like Rip Van Winkle here? Where do they start?
I think the simplest advice is there's urgency. There is serious urgency, because renewable energy, when it comes to switching up to renewable energy, it's not instantaneous. These plants can take 2 years to construct. It takes a lot of time. And for that 2 years, you are still likely to be exposed to carbon taxes. You're likely to be exposed to high increases. These things take time. These are mammoth projects. So every bit of delay results in a cumulative delay on the other side. So rather starting that journey and that thought process as soon as possible, getting ahead of the curve, because there's also limited, I think, grid capacity. So to give you a very practical example, in South Africa, it takes a year or two to be able to get access to the grid. In the UK and Europe and US, it could be between 5 and 15 years to get access. So for new projects to come online, you might have to wait. So if you're interested and see this as a potential avenue for you to get your footprint down, to get your cost of electricity down, the advice really is you better move it.
Well, that is the bottom line. That brings us to the end of an insightful conversation on Business Talk. Big thank you to Andre Nepgen, Head of Discovery Green, for shedding light, pun intended, on all of the challenges and opportunities as South African businesses transition to a low-carbon economy. And it's clear that one has to focus on doing things with speed and urgency in a market that is so rapidly evolving. For more insights like this, stay tuned to Business Talk right here on businesstech.co.za.